We are still 2 weeks away from the 2010 midterm elections, but the conservatives have already begun plotting their battle plan for 2012. ThinkProgress.org reported today that a secretive network of Republican donors is heading to the Palm Springs area for a long weekend in January, but not to relax after a hard-fought election. It'll be to plan for the next one. Koch Industries, spelled K-O-C-H, the longtime underwriter of libertarian causes from the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. to the ballot initiative that would suspend California's landmark law capping greenhouse gases, is planning a confidential meeting at the Rancho Las Palmas Resort and Spa to, as the invitation says, develop strategies to counter the most severe threats facing our free society and outline a vision of how we can foster a renewal of American free enterprise and prosperity. In other words, how the rich guys can completely take over our government, including the White House, in 2012. Joining me now is Lee Fong, blogger and reporter for Think Progress, the guy who wrote the story in today's ThinkProgress.org. Lee, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you with us. I think it's a staple of American politics to have conspiracy theories, all the way back to the Adams-Jefferson election, where there were rumors that because Adams had defended the British soldier before the Revolutionary War, he wasn't all that loyal, or was Jefferson loyal to the French because he used to live there, all the way to today. But now we're finding that there actually is a conspiracy.
Well, that's right. If we're here in D.C., you go a block to the east, you go a block north of us. If you take the metro, maybe 3 stops, you'll find dozens of different conservative think tanks, conservative institutes, conservative organs manipulating the media, manipulating college students, and they were almost all funded by actually a small clique of corporations and wealthy right-wing billionaires, many of which were actually at this meeting last summer in Aspen to plan the November elections, and are scheduled, although now that this memo has gotten public, they might not show up, but they're supposed to go to another meeting in January to plan the next 2 years.
These guys are almost without exception people, at least looking through the list, my view of the list. I'm not sure, if we have that to be able to roll in the background, but the list is just astounding. And it seems to me that these are all people, by and large, who would benefit financially, personally or corporately financially, from having control of government, having the ability to reduce regulation, for example, to get government off their backs. These are the actual people who really have government on their backs and want to get it off.
Sure. If you go down the list, obviously all these people are worth hundreds of millions, and in some cases tens of billions of dollars. So they want the Bush tax cuts for the very wealthy members of society extended. But if you look at the individual industries, you have a guy named Bill Cooper who runs a big bank in Minnesota. He actually sued the government to prevent the Dodd-Wall Street reform bill from being implemented because he doesn't want any financial regulation on his bank business, which specializes actually in mortgages.
Oh, geez.
You have almost half the attendees at this meeting specializing in fossil fuels. So they want to be able to put carbon pollution in our atmosphere without paying for it.
Sure.
Coal companies, oil companies, Koch Industries has several refineries that actually specialize in high carbon Canadian crude. So of course they don't want things like AB 32 in California or a national clean energy climate plan.
Right. And they're getting together and they're getting active. And what strikes me is that this is not new. This didn't just come about as a result of Citizens United. These guys have been doing this for a while. B, it's going on steroids with Citizens United. And C, Glenn Beck is at these meetings?
Well, just to break that down,
we have just a minute here.
The Koch brothers have been doing this for almost a decade now, planning these meetings. Their father, Fred Koch, has been doing this since the late 50s, organizing Texas oilmen to fund things like the John Birch Society. But given the Citizens United issue, one of the people who presented at the meeting last summer was a special Republican operative who authored a memo telling corporations that they should take advantage of Citizens United, exploit things like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Americans for Prosperity, and even use their corporations to lean on and coerce their employees to go out and get politically active on behalf of the corporations.
That's absolutely astounding. Absolutely astounding. Lee Fang, thinkprogress.org. Thanks for dropping by tonight.
Thanks for having me.
It's great having you with us. I just have to share with you this. You know, these guys, as Lee Fang just said, one of their big issues is, you know, bring back the Bush tax cuts for billionaires. In 1785, step into the Wayback Machine here. In 1785, Thomas Jefferson was the envoy to France. He was our sort of semi-ambassador to France, and was living in France, a little town, 15,000 people he identifies it as. And he wrote a letter, October 28th, to his cousin, by the name of James Madison, not the one who became president, but a cousin by that name. And in his letter he says, it's 7 o'clock and I've retired to my fireside. And he talks about this little village of 15,000 people. He said the king comes here in the fall to hunt. And then he talks about taking a walk through the town. He wanted to just, you know, get a sense of what's going on. What's this town like? He says, as soon as I got clear of the town, and you know, out through the woods, Jefferson, in fact, in one of his earlier letters to his nephew, he said, every day be sure to walk at least an hour. And you know, in the woods, that it's a therapeutic, psychologically, physically, and so he would do this. So he went on this walk. He says, as soon as I got clear of the town, I fell in with a poor woman walking at the same rate as myself and going the same course. So he meets this French woman. He says, she told me she was a day laborer and she had 2 children to maintain. And he describes what her rent was and her income was, and he said, so basically her house, her rent, cost 75 days' work for her, right? And he says, and often she had no employment and, of course, was without bread. I gave her on parting, he says, 24 sous, which is about a week's pay, and she burst into tears of a gratitude which I perceived was unfeigned because she was unable to utter a word. She'd probably never before received so great an aid. All right, so here's Jefferson, you know, coming face to face with this poverty. And he said, this little antediluvian with the solitude of my walk led me into a train of reflections on that unequal division of property, which occasions the numberless instances of wretchedness which I have observed in this country and to be observed all over Europe. The property of this country is absolutely concentrated in a very few hands. This is the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence. He says, I am conscious that an equal division of property is impractical, but the consequences of this enormous inequality, producing so much misery to the bulk of mankind, is terrible. He goes, he rants for several, you know, paragraphs about this, and then he says, a means of silently lessening, these are verbatim the words of Thomas Jefferson, a means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from all taxation of any form below a certain point and to tax the higher portion in geometric progression as they rise, right? In other words, he's talking about, you know, progressive income tax. And actually property tax as well. He said, whenever there are in any country uncultivated lands and unemployed poor, it is clear that the laws of property have been so far extended as to violate natural right. Thomas Jefferson saying not being poor is a natural right. The earth is given as a common stock, he writes, for man to labor and live on. If for the encouragement of industry we allow it to be appropriated, we must take care that other employment is provided. The government provide other employment. We must take care that other employment is provided to those excluded from the appropriation. If we do not, the fundamental right to labor the earth returns to the unemployed. He's defining employment as a right, one of the founders of our country. Incredible.